plot details for Game of Thrones' newly announced movie highlight a major issue with the Lord of the Rings franchise's upcoming cinematic return. Officially titled Game of Thrones, Aegon's Conquest, writer Beau Willimons, Ander, House of Cards, prequel film will, as the title suggests, chronicle Aegon I's invasion of Westeros and his quest to unite all 7 kingdoms under the Targaryen banner. Aegon the Conqueror's story is essentially the inciting incident for all of Westeros' on-screen history, including the stories told in HBO's flagship show and its prequel spin-off, House of the Dragon. The first, slated for release in December 2027, is Andy Serkis' The Lord of the Rings, The Hunt for Gollum, which will take place before, during, and soon after Bilbo Baggins' 111th birthday party in The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. The second Lord of the Rings movie in development is a more surprising prospect, as Peter Jackson will team up with proven Tolkien superfan Stephen Colbert to adapt the previously dismissed parts of Frodo, Sam, Pippin, and Merry's journey between their departure from the Shire and their arrival in Bree. The Lord of the Rings new movies have something very obvious in common: their inextricable connection to the events of the Fellowship of the Ring. While Aegon's Conquest and the Lord of the Rings' upcoming stories are all technically prequels, Warner Bros.' theatrical strategy with Game of Thrones has much more merit. It will actually add something new to the world of Game of Thrones, rather than rehashing and needlessly expanding a story that most audiences are already intimately familiar with. Game of Thrones, Aegon's Conquest can, despite being a prequel, function as a standalone story. Aegon I's reign in Westeros takes place roughly 100 years before the events of House of the Dragon, which in turn is set roughly 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones. As such, while Aegon's story has major implications for Westeros' timeline, the film's narrative can be enjoyed by both die-hard fans and casual fantasy fans alike. Since none of Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon's characters were alive during Aegon's conquest, with the exception, perhaps, of the Night King, who could theoretically star in Aegon's prophetic dreams about the long night as mentioned in House of the Dragon, the movie will also feature an entirely new cast of characters and actors. Audiences will have no reason to compare performances, giving them a clean slate to enjoy the story for what it is, rather than how it measures up to Game of Thrones' previous adaptations. Aegon's Conquest can do exactly what a prequel needs to do: provide meaningful context for the larger fictional universe without burdening or retconning what came before. That's what's so worrying about the Lord of the Rings' upcoming projects. Not only is their existence reliant on the continued popularity of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but audiences will never be able to separate them from their predecessors. Jackson's adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's fantasy epic is rightfully viewed as one of modern cinema's most incredible feats. It did the seemingly impossible, cleverly condensing Tolkien's complex lore while maintaining the Fellowship's universal story of resilience, hope, and love. The Lord of the Rings' high standard is difficult to live up to. Jackson's The Hobbit trilogy certainly didn't, and that at least had the advantage of focusing on a wholly different adventure, one only loosely connected to Frodo and company's defeat of Sauron in The Lord of the Rings. The Hunt for Gollum and Colbert's Shire-centric story won't even enjoy the same distance from Jackson's first trilogy as The Hobbit did. Everything will remind viewers of the Fellowship of the Ring. Comparison will be inevitable. Ian McKellen and Elijah Wood will even reprise their roles as Gandalf and Frodo in The Hunt for Gollum, making Viggo Mortensen's absence as Aragorn all the more noticeable. Jamie Dornan will take on the part instead. Neither The Hunt for Gollum nor Stephen Colbert's tentatively titled The Lord of the Rings, Shadow of the Past can really stand on their own. They don't feel like stories with a proper beginning, middle, and end. Instead, they're footnotes in the Lord of the Rings' wider saga, in The Hunt for Gollum's case, literally so. Whether the creative teams will be able to make these movies fit into Jackson's previously established canon remains to be seen. Arguably, these stories should have been added as additional scenes to the Fellowship of the Rings Extended Edition, rather than existing on their own. Of course, it's impossible to say how well, or not well, Serkis and Colbert's upcoming Middle-earth adventures translate to the big screen. These worries may prove to be completely unfounded. For now, though, as Game of Thrones prepares to bring one of Westeros' most pivotal journeys to the big screen, it's difficult not to wonder how the Lord of the Rings theatrical return will measure up.